The lecture hall on Convergence Prime Station was built to hold over 200 cadets from across the known galaxy. Today, it held exactly 147 students from 12 different species, all gathered for what the Academy called Comparative Armament Studies. Most of them thought it was a boring class. They were wrong. Cadet sat near the back of the room, surrounded by beings that looked nothing like him. To his left sat a named Chitterclick, whose compound eyes reflected the light from the presentation screen in 100 tiny images. To his right was a called Seven, whose body was made of living crystal that hummed softly whenever she moved. Behind him, a named coiled his serpentine body into the specially designed seating, his forked tongue tasting the recycled air. Was the only human in the room. That was normal. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Coalition 40 years ago, and there still were not many humans in the military academy. Most species had been part of the coalition for centuries, some for thousands of years. Humans were the newcomers, the late arrivals to a party that had started long before Earth even had electricity. The instructor for the day was a senior officer named Clicks with Purpose. He stood at the front of the room, his 4 arms moving constantly as he spoke, his mandibles clicking out words that the translation implants turned into standard galactic speech. Today we continue our examination of species-specific weapon systems, Clicks with Purpose announced. Each species brings unique advantages to coalition forces. Understanding these advantages makes us stronger as a combined military force. Had heard this speech before. Every instructor said some version of it. The coalition believed in diversity, in combining the strengths of many species into one fighting force. It was a nice idea, wondered if it was true. We will begin with sonic disruptors, the instructor continued. Volunteers, please come forward. 3 cadets walked to the front of the room. They carried weapons that looked like musical instruments, all curves and resonance chambers. One of them activated her weapon and felt his teeth vibrate even though the weapon was pointed at a target dummy across the room. The dummy shook violently, then fell apart into pieces. Sonic disruption attacks the molecular bonds of matter, Clicks with Purpose explained. Effective range is approximately 50 meters for personal weapons. Larger versions can reach several hundred meters. The class took notes, wrote down the numbers though he already knew them. He had studied hard before coming to the academy. He knew he had to. Humans had a reputation for being physically weak compared to most coalition species. He needed every advantage he could get. Next came the Seven walked to the front with 2 other members of her species. Their bodies caught the light and split it into rainbows as they moved. They carried weapons that looked like long rods made of the same crystal as their bodies. Light refraction lances, Seven announced. Her voice sounded like wind chimes. Our bodies naturally process and redirect electromagnetic radiation. Our weapons amplify this ability. She raised her lance and pointed it at a new target dummy. A beam of concentrated light shot from the weapon, so bright that half the class had to look away. When looked back, the dummy had a hole burned clean through its center. Effective range of 400 meters for personal weapons, Seven said. There was pride in her voice. Larger installations can strike targets in low orbit. They were next, and his companions slithered to the front, their scaled bodies moving in waves across the floor. They carried weapons that looked like whips made of some kind of metal. Neural whips hissed. They interface with the nervous systems of biological targets. One touch causes complete paralysis. Extended contact causes death. He demonstrated on a dummy that had been fitted with sensors to simulate a nervous system. The whip touched it, and every sensor lit up red before going dark. Effective range of 3 meters for the whip itself, explained. But we can also fire the neural charge as a projectile. That extends range to approximately 100 meters. The demonstrations continued. They showed their gravity manipulation devices, which could crush enemies or throw them across a battlefield. The methane breathers displayed their chemical sprayers, which could dissolve most known materials. The tall ones demonstrated their psychic amplifiers, which could stun or confuse enemies from a distance. Each species had something impressive. Each weapon had some unique advantage. Watched and took notes and waited for his turn. Finally, Clicks with Purpose looked at his schedule and made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh. "And now the human presentation," he said. His tone suggested he did not expect much. "Colonel, please come forward." A woman walked to the front of the room. She was short by human standards, with gray streaking her black hair and a scar that ran from her left eye down to her jaw. She wore the standard coalition uniform, but on her shoulder was a patch that recognized as belonging to Earth's own military forces. Colonel carried a case. She set it on the presentation table and opened it. Inside was what looked like a simple metal tube with a handle and a few attachments. The room was silent for a moment. Then Seven made a sound that her translator rendered as laughter. "What is that?" she asked. "A piece of pipe." Several other cadets laughed. Even Clicks with Purpose seemed confused. He leaned forward to examine the object. "This is a primitive kinetic launcher, yes?" the instructor asked. "I was told humans still use such things, but I assumed for ceremonial purposes." Colonel said nothing. She simply looked at the instructor with an expression that recognized. It was the expression his grandmother made when someone said something very stupid, but she was too polite to point it out directly. "It fires physical projectiles," finally said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "No energy beam, no exotic particles, just a piece of metal moving very fast." More laughter from the class. A cadet near the front spoke up. "With respect, Colonel, we stopped using kinetic weapons 3,000 years ago. Energy weapons are more efficient, more accurate, and more powerful. Why would humans still use such primitive technology?" "Because it works," replied. She held up the weapon so everyone could see it. The overhead lights reflected off its dark surface. "This is a rifle. Specifically, it is a precision rifle designed for long-range engagement. It fires a projectile weighing approximately 10 grams at a velocity of roughly 900 meters per second." "Meters per second?" asked. "That seems slow. Our neural charges travel at nearly the speed of light." "Light travels in a straight line and can be detected by energy sensors," said. "My bullet travels in a slight arc and cannot be detected until after it hits the target." The laughter had stopped. Noticed that some of the cadets were now looking more closely at the weapon. "I do not understand the advantage," Clicks with Purpose admitted. "Your weapon is slower and presumably less accurate than energy weapons. What makes it special?" Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Would anyone like to stay after class for a practical demonstration? The range is available, and I think some of you might find it educational." Most of the cadets began packing their things. They had other classes, other obligations, and no interest in watching a human fire a primitive weapon at targets. But a few stayed behind. Seven stayed, her crystal body humming with what guessed was amusement. She clearly wanted to see the human embarrass herself. Stayed too, his tongue flicking with curiosity. Two cadets remained, floating on their personal gravity fields. A handful of others lingered near the door, not quite committed but not quite leaving either. Stayed, of course he stayed. He knew something the others did not. Colonel packed up her rifle and nodded to those who remained. "Follow me to the range," she said, "and please feel free to bring your own weapons. We can compare." As they walked through the corridors of the academy, Seven moved to walk beside. The towered over the human, her crystalline body catching and reflecting every light they passed. "I mean no disrespect, Colonel," Seven said. Her tone suggested the opposite. "But I am curious why humans cling to such outdated technology. Is it a cultural tradition, a religious practice?" "It is neither," replied. "It is simply the most effective tool for certain tasks." What tasks could a kinetic launcher perform better than a light refraction lance? I will show you. They reached the range. It was an outdoor facility, though outdoor meant something different on a space station. The sky above was a dome showing a simulated blue with white clouds. The ground was reinforced to absorb weapons fire. Targets of various sizes stood at various distances down the kilometer-long range. Felt his heart beating faster. He had seen demonstrations like this before on Earth during his basic training. He knew what was about to happen. The others did not. Colonel began setting up her weapon. She attached a scope to the top and loaded a magazine into the bottom. Her movements were smooth and practiced, the result of decades of experience. "Before we begin," she said, "does anyone have questions about human ranged weapons?" Seven's body hummed louder. "Yes. How do you expect to compete with weapons that fire at the speed of light?" Looked at her, that smile returned. "Watch and learn." The range stretched out before them like a wound cut into the surface of Convergence Prime. Most species found it adequate for testing their weapons. They used it to demonstrate their light refraction lances against targets at 400 meters. They tested their sonic disruptors at 50 meters, the maximum effective range before the sound waves dispersed. Even the, with their gravity manipulation devices, rarely engaged targets beyond 300 meters. Colonel looked at the existing targets and shook her head. "We will need additional targets," she said, "much further out." Clicks with Purpose had followed them to the range, curious despite himself. The range extends for 1 kilometer. That should be sufficient for any personal weapon. "It will not be sufficient for this demonstration," replied. "But it will have to do for now. Please set targets at 100 meters, 500 meters, and 1,000 meters. If possible, I would like 1 additional target at the maximum distance your facilities can provide." The instructor made a clicking sound that translated as surprise. The maximum distance would be approximately 2,300 meters at the far edge of the station's external training platform. That is typically reserved for ship-mounted weapons testing. "That will do." While the targets were being set up, Seven moved closer to examine's rifle. The human allowed it, even pointing out the various components. "The barrel is rifled, meaning it has spiral grooves inside," explained. "This causes the bullet to spin as it leaves the weapon. The spin stabilizes the projectile in flight, making it more accurate over long distances." "How long is long?" asked. He had coiled his body nearby, his eyes fixed on the weapon. "For this particular rifle, effective range against a personnel-sized target is approximately 3,000 meters. Against larger targets, such as vehicles or structures, specialized variants can reach much further." The range controller announced that all targets were in place. Through the scope of her rifle, could see 4 shapes at increasing distances. The closest was clearly visible to the naked eye. The furthest was just a speck, barely distinguishable from the station's superstructure behind it. "I will engage each target in sequence, beginning with the closest," said. "Please observe carefully. You may want to use optical enhancement." Several cadets activated zoom functions in their optical implants or pulled out viewing devices. Seven simply shifted the crystalline structure of her eyes to increase magnification. Watched with his bare human eyes, though he knew he would not be able to see the distant targets clearly. Raised the rifle to her shoulder. Her breathing slowed. Her body became perfectly still. The first shot came without warning. There was no buildup of energy, no glow of charging systems, no humming of power cells, just a crack of sound so sharp that flinched backward and Seven's crystal body rang like a struck bell. By the time the sound reached their ears, the target at 100 meters was already falling apart, a hole punched clean through its center. "Target 1 eliminated," said calmly. She shifted her aim slightly. Another crack. The target at 500 meters fell. "Target 2 eliminated." Another shift. Another crack, 1,000 meters. The target was barely visible to most observers, but it fell just as quickly as the others. Target 3 eliminated. Paused. She adjusted a dial on her scope. She checked something on the side of her weapon. Her breathing slowed even further, becoming so shallow that could not see her chest moving. The fourth shot was slightly different. The sound was the same sharp crack, but there was a moment of silence afterward. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, at the very edge of visibility, 2,300 meters away, the final target fell. The range was silent. Was the first to speak. The projectile took time to reach the target. Your weapon is slower than light-based systems. Yes, agreed. At that distance, there is a delay of approximately 2.5 seconds between firing and impact. Then an enemy could dodge, said. They could see you fire and move aside. Lowered her rifle. She looked at with an expression that was almost kind. No, she said, they could not. I do not understand. You just admitted there is a delay. The delay is between firing and impact, but my target cannot see me fire. There is no energy beam to track, no flash of light to detect. The bullet is too small and too fast for most sensor systems. By the time the target hears the sound of the shot, the bullet has already arrived. She let that sink in. At 2,300 meters, the bullet reaches the target before the sound does. The first warning an enemy receives is the impact. By then, it is too late. 7 stepped forward. Her crystal body was no longer humming with amusement. It was making a different sound, one that did not recognize. Surely at such distances, accuracy becomes impossible, she said. No one can hit a target they can barely see. Human snipers train for years to make exactly these shots, replied. The current record for a confirmed combat hit is approximately 3,500 meters. That record will likely be broken soon. Combat hit, Clicks with Purpose asked. You mean humans have used such weapons against living targets at these ranges? Extensively. The instructor's mandibles clicked in a pattern that translated as discomfort. But how does the target defend themselves? With energy weapons, there is always some warning. A power signature, a charging indicator, a visible beam. How do you defend against something you cannot see coming? You do not, said simply. That is the point. 7 was not ready to give up. Her competitive nature would not allow it. I would like to test this theory, she announced. Set a target at 400 meters. I will demonstrate the superiority of light refraction technology. Nodded, a new target was placed. 7 raised her lance and fired. The beam of light was beautiful, a concentrated rainbow that crossed the distance to the target instantaneously. The target melted in a spray of molten material. You see, 7 said, speed of light, no delay, no chance to dodge. Impressive, acknowledged. Now, please tell me what would happen if I simply stepped behind that support pillar before you fired. She pointed to a metal column about 20 meters away. 7 hesitated. I would wait until you emerged. And if I never emerged? If I simply waited until you had to move, then fired the moment any part of your body became visible? I would detect your weapon powering up. My weapon does not power up. It is always ready to fire. Then I would see you aiming. At 3,000 meters, you would not see me at all. I would be invisible to your optical systems, but I would see you perfectly through my scope. 7's body made that strange sound again, realized it was fear. You are describing assassination, she said, not combat. I am describing both, replied. The line between them is thinner than you might think. Uncoiled slightly, his serpentine body straightening as if preparing to flee. How quickly can you fire again? If you miss, how soon can you try again? Ejected her empty magazine and inserted a fresh one. The motion took less than 2 seconds. This rifle holds 10 rounds. I can fire approximately 1 round per second in rapid engagement, or take careful aimed shots every few seconds for precision work. If I need more firepower, we have variants that fire 30 rounds per magazine with much faster cycling. 30 projectiles, Clicks with Purpose repeated, all traveling at 900 meters per second, all impossible to see or track. Yes, and that is just the rifle. We have not discussed artillery, missiles, or orbital kinetic bombardment. What is orbital kinetic bombardment? The cadet asked. Smile returned. Exactly what it sounds like. We drop heavy objects from orbit. They fall fast enough that the impact is equivalent to a nuclear explosion, but without the radiation. The range fell silent again. Watched his fellow cadets process what they were hearing. He remembered his own reaction when he first learned about human weapons. He had grown up with them, understood them intuitively, but seeing them through the eyes of species who had never developed such technology was a strange experience. To humans, a rifle was normal, ordinary, something that existed in museums and shooting ranges and military bases. To these aliens, it was something else entirely. It was a nightmare they had never imagined. Seven had recovered some of her composure. She walked toward the presentation table where had set down her rifle. She moved slowly, as if approaching something dangerous. "May I examine it more closely?" she asked. "Of course." The reached out and touched the rifle. Her crystalline fingers traced along the barrel, the stock, the trigger guard. She picked it up and was surprised by its weight. "It is heavy," she observed. "Solid. No power cells, no energy conduits, just metal and polymer." "It is self-contained," explained. "No external power source required. The energy comes from the chemical propellant in each cartridge. Each round is its own complete system. So if I destroyed your power grid, disabled your vehicles, cut off your supply lines completely, you could still use this weapon." Yes, a human soldier with a rifle and ammunition can continue fighting indefinitely, regardless of infrastructure support. That is part of its advantage. Seven set the weapon down carefully, very carefully. "I think I am beginning to understand," she said quietly. "This is why humans survived your—" Nodded. "Earth is a dangerous place. We were never the biggest predators, never the fastest or strongest. We survived by becoming the most dangerous thing on our planet. These weapons are how we did it." She picked up the rifle and began disassembling it for cleaning. Her hands moved automatically, performing a task she had done thousands of times. "Every species develops weapons suited to their nature," she continued. "Sonic technology is powerful but requires careful tuning to your unique vocal structures. Light manipulation uses abilities no other species possesses. Neural weapons interface with biological systems in ways only your kind can control. These are all effective tools, but they are species-specific." She held up a single bullet, a small brass cylinder with a pointed tip. "Human weapons are different. They are simple. Any species with hands can learn to use them. Any factory can produce them. They require no special abilities, no unique biology, no exotic materials, just physics. Mass times velocity equals kinetic energy." She loaded the bullet into the magazine. "And kinetic energy does not care what species you are. It kills everyone equally." Had been quiet for several minutes, his tongue tasting the air repeatedly. Finally, he spoke. "I have a question," he said. "At the range you demonstrated, 2,300 meters, what would happen if I tried to stand up from a hidden position?" Looked at him. She leaned closer, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It will hit you before you stand." Became very still. His tongue stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the human woman with an intensity that recognized as pure, primal fear. "Before I stand," he repeated. "You are saying that even the motion of rising would be too slow. At that range, the bullet travels faster than your nervous system can process a decision to move. By the time your brain sends the signal to your muscles, the bullet has already crossed half the distance. By the time your muscles begin to respond, it has arrived. She straightened up and began packing her equipment. This is what humans learned on Earth, fighting each other for 10,000 years. Speed matters, distance matters, but most of all, invisibility matters. The enemy you cannot see is the enemy you cannot fight. We built our entire military doctrine around that principle. She closed the case and locked it. Now you understand why we still use kinetic weapons. Not because we cannot build energy systems. We can, we have. But sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Sometimes a simple piece of metal, moving very fast, is the most terrifying thing in the universe. The demonstration was over. The cadets filed out slowly, each of them lost in thought. Seven walked beside, her crystal body still making that fearful sound. "Your species," she said quietly. "You are all like this. You all know how to use these weapons." Many of us admitted. It is part of our culture, part of our history. "I thought humans were supposed to be weak, physically inferior. That is what we were taught." Smiled. It was the same smile Colonel had worn. "We are physically inferior," he said. "That is why we became so good at killing from a distance." They walked in silence back to the main academy building. Above them, the simulated sky shifted toward evening, artificial stars beginning to appear. Somewhere on the station, in a range designed for testing ship-mounted weapons, a target lay in pieces. It had been hit before anyone saw the shot coming. That was, reflected, exactly the point. The evening cycle on Convergence Prime brought a simulated sunset that painted the station's interior in shades of orange and gold. Most cadets were in their quarters, studying or resting. But in the main commons, a group had gathered around a large display screen. Seven sat at the center, her crystalline body pulsing with colors that her translator identified as anxiety and curiosity. Beside her had coiled his serpentine form tightly, his scales dull with stress. The two cadets hovered nearby, their gravity fields flickering with nervousness. Clicks with Purpose, who should have returned to his instructor duties, had stayed to participate in what was becoming an impromptu research session. They were reading about human military history. "This cannot be accurate," Seven said, her voice like breaking glass. "The records say humans killed over 70 million of their own kind in a single conflict." World War II, Clicks with Purpose confirmed. He had been verifying the data from multiple sources. "The records are consistent across all human databases, 70 to 80 million deaths, depending on how indirect casualties are counted." "In how many years?" "6. His tongue flicked rapidly. "That is more than the entire population of the. They killed that many of their own species in 6 years. And it was not even their largest war by percentage," the instructor added. "Earlier conflicts killed smaller absolute numbers but larger proportions of their population. They have been fighting each other at scale for at least 10,000 years." The screen displayed images from human history. Seven had searched for information about human weapons, but what she found went far beyond rifles and bullets. There were tanks, massive armored vehicles that could crush anything in their path while firing projectiles that penetrated any known material. There were aircraft that could drop explosives from heights no enemy could reach. There were submarines that lurked beneath the water, invisible and patient, launching weapons at targets thousands of kilometers away. And then there were the nuclear weapons. "I do not understand this diagram," one of them said. "What does megatons mean?" "It is a measure of explosive force," Clicks with Purpose explained. 1 megaton equals the energy of 1 million tons of chemical explosive. "And how many megatons was the largest weapon humans built?" The instructor was quiet for a moment. 50. They tested a weapon with a yield of 50 megatons. The fireball was 8 kilometers wide. The shockwave circled their planet 3 times. They used this on their enemies. No, they used smaller versions. The 50-megaton device was a test to prove they could build it. They actually reduced its power from a planned 100 megatons because they were worried about the consequences. The Commons fell silent, had entered without anyone noticing. He stood near the back, listening to the conversation, watching his fellow cadets discover what it meant to be human. "Why?" Seven asked. The question was simple, but her voice carried a weight of confusion that went beyond language. Why would any species develop such weapons to use against themselves? Stepped forward. The aliens turned to look at him. Some of them shifted away as if he had suddenly become dangerous. "Because we were always our own greatest predators," he said. He walked to the display and brought up a map of Earth. The blue and green sphere rotated slowly, showing continents and oceans. "Look at our planet," he said. "One world, no interstellar neighbors, no external threats. For our entire evolutionary history, the only enemies we faced were on Earth, other animals, natural disasters, disease, and each other." He zoomed in on the map, showing the borders between nations. "We split ourselves into groups, tribes, nations, empires, and those groups competed for resources, for territory, for power. The groups that developed better weapons survived. The groups that fell behind were conquered." "That sounds horrible," said. It is, but it is also how we learned. Every war taught us something new. Every conflict drove innovation. We did not develop weapons because we enjoyed killing. We developed them because the groups that did not develop them ceased to exist." He pulled up another image, this one showing the famous photograph of Earth from space, the small blue marble floating in endless darkness. "We call this the pale blue dot," said. "From out here, all of our wars, all of our conflicts, all of our history happened on that tiny speck. Every weapon we ever built, every battle we ever fought, was contained on that one small world." "And yet you killed millions," Seven said. "Tens of millions, hundreds of millions over your history." "Yes, we did, because that is what happens when you are your own predator. You become very good at hunting the most dangerous prey you know, yourselves." The cadet who had asked about megatons spoke up. "The instructor said you never used your largest weapons in actual combat. Why not?" "Because we realized we had gone too far. Nuclear weapons changed everything. For the first time, we developed a weapon that could destroy us completely. Not just enemy nations, not just armies, but our entire species. We had to learn restraint because the alternative was extinction." "But you still built more of them," Clicks with Purpose observed. "Your records show you have thousands of nuclear weapons stockpiled." "Yes, because we do not trust ourselves. We keep the weapons as a warning, a reminder of what we could do if pushed too far. It is called deterrence. No one attacks us because they know what we could unleash in response." "That is madness," hissed. "You threaten your own destruction to prevent attack." "It has worked so far," said with a shrug. "Humans have not had a major war between nuclear powers since we developed these weapons. The threat of mutual destruction keeps the peace." "But at what cost? Living in constant fear of annihilation." "The cost of not living in fear was worse, trust me." Seven had been quiet, processing everything she had heard. Now she spoke, her voice soft and resonant. "The rifle your colonel demonstrated today, it seemed so simple, so primitive. But it is connected to all of this, is it not? The tanks, the aircraft, the nuclear weapons. They are all part of the same evolution." "Yes, the rifle is just the smallest piece of human military technology. It is the weapon individual soldiers carry. But behind every soldier is an entire system: artillery, air support, naval bombardment, satellite surveillance, electronic warfare, and if all of that fails, nuclear options. You have all of this at your disposal, every human soldier. Every human soldier is part of a structure that can call upon any level of force required. From a single bullet to the complete destruction of a planet. That is human military doctrine. We scale our response to the threat. The Commons was very quiet, could see his words sinking in, could watch the aliens everything they thought they knew about humanity. I thought humans were peaceful now, one of them said. You joined the coalition, you signed treaties, you seemed harmless. We are peaceful, agreed. Now, because we choose to be, because we looked at what we had built, what we were capable of, and decided we did not want to keep killing. But the capability never disappeared. The knowledge is still there. The weapons are still there. And if the coalition ever became a threat to you, met the size, then you would learn why every species that has ever threatened humanity either made peace or ceased to exist. The words hung in the air. No one spoke. After a long moment, Seven rose from her seat. Her crystal body had stopped making fearful sounds. Now it hummed with something else. Respect, perhaps, or awe. I owe you an apology, Cadet, she said. I have spent weeks thinking humans were the weakest species in the Academy. I mocked your lack of natural weapons, your soft skin, your fragile bodies. I was wrong. You were not entirely wrong, said. We are physically weaker than most species. Our bodies are not impressive, but our minds created weapons to compensate for what our bodies lacked, and our minds never stopped improving those weapons. The rifle was not primitive at all, was it? It was exactly what it needed to be. It is the perfected form of a tool we have been developing for centuries. Simple, reliable, deadly. Everything unnecessary has been removed. Everything required has been refined. That is how humans approach all problems. We iterate. We improve. We do not stop until we have found the most efficient solution. Uncoiled slightly. What you showed us today, the rifle and the range demonstration, that was you being gentle with us, showing us the smallest part of your capabilities. Yes, Colonel could have shown you much more, but she wanted to make a specific point. Individual human soldiers with individual weapons can kill at ranges your species never considered possible. That is just the baseline. Everything else is built on top of that. Why tell us this? Clicks with Purpose asked. Why reveal your capabilities to potential rivals? Smiled, because you are not our rivals. You are our allies. The coalition is the best chance humanity has ever had at lasting peace. We do not want to fight you. We want to fight alongside you. And if enemies of the coalition threaten us all, then those enemies will learn what humanity spent 10,000 years perfecting. They will learn why every predator on Earth learned to fear us. They will learn what it means to fight something that cannot be seen, cannot be detected, and will not stop until the threat is eliminated. He turned back to the display, still showing the pale blue dot. We came from a world that tried to kill us. We survived. We thrived. And along the way, we became the most dangerous species in our corner of the galaxy. That is not a threat. That is simply what we are. The display cycled through more images. Let them play. Ancient spears and bows, medieval cannons, modern rifles, missiles and aircraft carriers and orbital platforms. Every weapon on this display was created by humans to kill other humans, he said. Think about that. The most dangerous weapons we have ever built were designed to be used on ourselves. Now imagine what we would create if we turned that creativity against a true external enemy. Seven's crystal body rang like a bell struck in perfect resonance. I think I finally understand why humans were invited to join the coalition. Why is that? Not because you needed protection, because everyone else needed your protection. The coalition saw what you were capable of and decided it was better to have you as allies than as enemies. Nodded, that is probably accurate, and for what it is worth, we agreed because we are tired of fighting. We spent 10,000 years killing each other. We would rather spend the next 10,000 years building something better, but if anyone threatens that peace, it will hit them before they stand, finished. Now you understand. The evening cycle continued. The artificial stars brightened as the simulated sky darkened. Around the commons, alien cadets sat in silence, processing everything they had learned. They had come to the academy thinking humans were weak. They had stayed after class expecting to mock primitive weapons. They had researched human history looking for weaknesses. Instead, they had found something terrifying. A species that had survived being its own predator. A species that had invented weapons capable of destroying worlds. A species that had looked at extinction and decided to simply stop fighting rather than accept the consequences. And a species that had never, not once, forgotten how to kill. Returned to his quarters as the station's night cycle began. Tomorrow there would be more classes, more training, more opportunities to prove himself alongside his alien classmates. Tomorrow he would be just another cadet, struggling to keep up with species that were faster, stronger, and more naturally gifted. But tonight, something had changed. The other cadets looked at him differently now. They saw the quiet human who sat in the back of lecture halls and never complained, and they understood what lay beneath that calm exterior. 10,000 years of evolution, 10,000 years of war, 10,000 years of learning to kill anything that threatened their survival. Humans were not weak. They had simply learned to hide their strength until it was needed. And anyone who forgot that lesson would learn it the hard way. At 2,300 meters, the bullet arrives before you can stand. That was not a limitation. That was a promise.